Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 419, featuring Chris Edwards, who is one of the co-founders and the CEO of the Third Floor Visualization Studio. And I am not talking about an architecture visualization studio. I'm actually talking about a feature film visualization studio. Most people think of visualization or visual Previz when they think of this, but he actually explains how visualization now happens completely almost the entire time where the film is happening. That's why it's just basically a visualization studio. Really cool what they do. They talk about amazing technology, of course, their origin story. We get to find out why it's actually called the third floor, which is great. And also find out a little bit about, the new technology that they've been developing. They did something called Eyeline, which they used on Avatar, The Way of Water. Very interesting to hear about that. And some of the new projects they've worked on. They worked on Mandalorian, they worked on the new Ant-Man, and they worked on almost all the major films that have happened in the last 20 years. They're incredible studios. So really glad to have Chris on, and I hope to have many more people from the third floor on as well to talk about some of the cool things they're developing there. All right. Want to go through a couple of announcements. Here are a couple of events happening on April 4th and 5th of 2023. We will be in Paris, France for BIM World Paris. Of course, if you're into BIM and you have all of that stuff going on, go check us out. We'll be at BIM World Paris, and April 16th through the 21st, 2023, we will be in Munich, Germany for about 2023 BAU. BAU is the world-leading World Trade Fair for architecture, materials, and systems. So go check us out there. Again, that is April 16th through the 21st of 2023, and that is in Munich, Germany. And if you want to know more about all of our events, we got a lot more announcements. Go to chaos.com/events. Again, that is chaos.com/events. And if you want to learn more about this podcast, you can just go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And of course, you can always watch us, which is on youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. If you have any other suggestions or ideas or anything you'd like to know about the podcast, or just, of course, you can always email us. It's labs@chaos.com. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 419 with Mr. Chris Edwards of the Third Floor.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
As you said, this is a Two Chris podcast. Very excited to do that. I had Liz Montez on a few months back, or maybe.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah. She's
what a brilliant person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was my coordinator at DD way back when, and she's just an incredible person, and I'm really excited to see all the success she's had at Third Floor. And so ever since then, I was like, I really should get Chris on as well. Now that I think about it, so I'm glad we finally made this possible. But let's what I like to do to start off with is find out a little bit about your background. What got you interested in films in general? Obviously, you're a Previz person, so films is a passion of yours. So where did that passion come from?
Well, I guess I had to start at the beginning because it really came from my childhood. Like many in this industry, we were all inspired by some of the early science fiction films that were released during that time. For me, it was Star Wars Episode 4, the first Star Wars movie, my first movie in the movie theater.
Wow. And
really an inspiration at age 3. And since that time, I really had a love for Hollywood movies, and then I discovered European cinema and all of the stuff that I watched actually on film, on 16 millimeter film that was available at just about every library that was around town, but no one seemed to rent them or take them home, so I did. And so anytime I was sick or sequestered for any reason, I would just watch the world cinema as best as I could. And then I guess my interest was further heightened because one day, my mom brought home that book, the Black ILM book that explains the history of special effects. Mm-hmm. And I got really inspired by not only what George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and some of the other pioneering filmmakers were doing, but the real artisans behind all of that great innovation that was happening, leaps and bounds, film over film. And what was inspiring about it was like, people coming from other disciplines, other walks of life, and combining forces with other compatible artists, other people from different disciplines, to do something that's greater than the sum of all of their skills, and really, at the time, very much blow away audiences. So I was like, man, I have to do this. I have to get into this. But of course, there were no programs in school that would teach you to be a special effects artist or in the visual effects industry. So it was kind of choose your own adventure, right?
Right. Yeah. Especially back then, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you start studying?
So, I researched all the great filmmakers, and I said, well, what did they do? Well, if they didn't just start making a film on their own, and they went to a little bit of college, they went to a film school, usually a traditional film school. And so that's what I started looking into. I went out to USC, I went to Cal Arts, I went all over the place. But ultimately ended up going to RIT, which is Rochester Institute of Technology.
I know where that is.
Upstate New York.
Yeah, I went to Colgate.
Yeah, it's kind of the dark horse. It's really, really appreciated because it actually was born out of the work that was being done in Rochester under Kodak, which used to be kind of an important company in the film industry. And so there was a great photography program and kind of an offshoot film and video program up there. So what I loved about it is that I got to really learn how to use the equipment. And for me, that's all I really wanted to learn is that, and then to immerse myself in a community of other filmmakers so that we could chart our own path, which was not exactly what the university wanted me to do. They wanted me to perhaps become a grip or a camera person or work in New York City, perhaps, in the industry. I wanted to combine my passion for computer graphics at the time, which is sort of my hobby on the side, with what I learned in film language. And so, long story short, I had to campaign really hard to do a final film there that they would allow me to do as a CG short. I did that all in my bedroom with the very first version of 3D Studio Max Student Edition.
Right. And
we cranked it out. I cranked it out and got a little help on the sound and whatnot. And it was just enough to get me under the closing Indiana Jones door of the industry as I was at SIGGRAPH the following year and really trying to get in. Luckily, I had done a lot of internships right before and really ratcheting myself up from, just unpaid intern, night shift guy to, being a little bit more vital to the production.
Sure.
And it was one of those instances at Cinesite when I was working for a woman named Jinko Goto, who's an awesome animation producer. Jinko took pity on my soul and gave me a killer interview at Disney Feature Animation, which is where I started my professional animation and layout career. And it became ultimately my first real job.
Awesome. Well, she's actually been on the podcast. I met her this at THU last year. So she was really, really cool.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. She's a bright light and was always so kind to me. She gave me the interview of a lifetime so that I could meet the head of layout, which is the top dog for scene design on an animated film, right? This was a film called Disney's Dinosaur, if anyone remembers that one. It was a really pioneering film because we had paleontologists and stop motion animators and traditional animation folks learning computer graphics for the first time. And they needed to put together a little team that could actually start laying out, like, what are these scenes going to look like around the story sketches that they had already worked out. And so they called it 3D Workbook. And 3D Workbook itself is just the next phase up from a story sketch where you're kind of halfway to layout, you're adding shading, you're getting a little more specific about the exact locale and staging of the environment and the characters. So that seemed to make sense at the time, the 3D version of that, using soft image, and which was the only program I didn't actually know. So I started the first day going, oh man, I should probably look into the manual for this,
Right.
with my Disney badge and everything. But I picked it up pretty quick, and that became the little engine that could on Dinosaur. That just I would think I was employee number 3, and there were up to 6 employees that were hired there for that, and we did the run of show, staging dinosaurs virtually so that they could shoot those live action backgrounds. And we did a bit of what was then later called TechViz to show the crew, like where in Hawaii or where in whatever exotic location they were, the shot could look like from this GPS location and that lens.
Right.
So anyways, that's my origin story for understanding the power of computer-generated layout, aka Previz.
Right.
And I was at Disney for 5 years, also working with the great heads of traditional layout, a guy named Razul Azadani, who's an amazing, brilliant gentleman I think he's the longest serving head of layout at Disney, and worked on Aladdin and so many other amazing Disney classics. So we were working together on Treasure Planet.
Okay.
And at first he was a little skeptical of what are all these 3D computer generated people doing under my purview when I'm really a 2D guy.
Right.
And he's very passionate about his work. So, I really had to earn his trust.
Right.
And at the end of our whole journey, it was so great because he came to me and he said, from now on, Chris, I thought I wanted to do everything in 2D, but now I want to do everything in 3D. And he, please, teach me how to do this, and I'll teach you what I know about composition. It was just, it's everything I didn't learn in film school that
Right.
to this day I have carried into the visualization arts. And, it was an inspiration. But I knew that I needed to leave Disney in order to find my dream team, to be able to make a difference bigger than just an employee at a great company. Mm-hmm. And that's what my Skywalker Ranch experience became.
Okay. So what were you doing at Skywalker Ranch?
Well, there's so many people that tell different stories of how they got to Skywalker Ranch. But for me, it was actually just coincidence because I was working a job on the side with a guy named David Dozoritz, who's also one of the awesome godfathers of the pre-visualization industry. He used to be the very first manager of the team that worked to support George Lucas at Skywalker Ranch, not as part of ILM, but really part of what they call JAC Films, Jet Amanda Katie Films, I think. That's George's first, all of his kids, right? So it's an acronym. It's the production company that he surrounds himself with to pre-produce the movie and to do the editing, literally at the ranch in the old, I think, Victorian house that he built on the second Star Wars movie, so on Empire, or for Empire. So I ended up working with David Dozoritz on a Peter Pan remake sequel, and I guess I impressed him enough that he said, "Hey, you'd probably be good to fill in some position that it was coming available up there on now what would become Star Wars Episode 3. So because of that hot tip, I got the interview of a lifetime. And I remember it was so funny because I went in there and I was talking to the folks that were interviewing me, and they seemed a little bit like taken aback when I started talking about my love for THX 1138, which some of you out there may know as George's first professional film in the industry beyond his student film, which is, I think, called Electronic Labyrinth at USC.
I thought 1138 was a student film too, that they sort of expanded into a feature film.
Well, that's what the Electronic Labyrinth at USC, that I'm sure they show a lot to incoming students, was the core concept, the way I understand it, behind the world and the basic storyline of THX. And I think that's what was then shown to Coppola, who then took a liking to George and his concept and gave him guidance, maybe funding. I'm not sure who funded it, but it was not a very expensive film. And then George, like he did magically years later with Star Wars, A New Hope, he made a mountain out of a molehill in a way. And it's such a beautiful way by shooting buildings in THX 1138, the feature with Robert Duvall, shooting buildings that were a little hippie, a little Frank Lloyd Wright, little strange buildings that from different angles that would give the impression that this is a futuristic world. So it's about the choices he made and what not to show that created such an otherworldly film for cheap. And so it became pretty clear that George Lucas was very, very into this subject matter that is all over THX 1138. So when we started, when I got that job, because they said I'm the only one babbling about how cool THX is, and by the way, we're doing a special edition director's cut version of that movie, so I guess we have to hire you. Mm-hmm. So I ended up getting that gig, and that was our, quote, trial by fire, if you will. Like, if we could survive THX, the remake edition, then we'd get to know George, we'd ingratiate ourselves, and he would trust us and have a secondhand, I guess, rapport creatively with us. And then the reward was, hey, you get to work on Star Wars Episode 3.
Right.
And so we did that for the remainder of our time there, which turned out to be about a 2-year stint if you combine THX and Episode 3. We also worked a little bit on the War of the Worlds remake film, Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise. It was such an honor to work with him because we had worked a bit on Star Wars sequences that he had kind of ghost directed with George. A couple of sequences that George invited him in to help do the layout for, and so I guess Steven really liked the process, and he applied it to some of the more complex shots and setups in War of the Worlds. So we felt like at the end of that crazy experience that we had, this unbelievable experience, that we had a lot to offer the world, but nobody knew what we were doing. And we were so behind the scenes that we really just wanted to find the best way to set up a little storefront, do the road less traveled, if you will. It would have been probably pretty easy for all of us to individually get jobs at various visual effects studios with our pedigree and some of the stuff that we could talk about, but probably couldn't show at the time. Yet we decided to not do that, resist temptation, because if we had all scattered to the winds, we probably would have never been able to keep that family collaboration that we had. So against all odds, a lot of the folks, they moved down. Most of them moved into my house, which, since I was from Walt Disney Feature Animation, I knew the LA area. I had a house down there, so I ended up hosting them for a little bit, just long enough to get our company going, get a little revenue going. I ended up working a day job at Sony ImageWorks and loving it, supporting Sony Pictures animation films. So it was like me leaning on my old school job of, okay, I'm pretty good at feature film layout. So they brought me into this amazing team that was working on Open Season.
Oh, right.
The very first Open Season, and then Surf's Up after that with Rob Bradow.
Right.
And under the great James Williams, who is a awesome layout supervisor who went on to work on a Spider-Verse movie.
Right.
So anyways, good pedigree of folks that were there. But I remember, like, a lot of my colleagues are saying, man, it was a grueling day. Ooh, we really got through a lot of work, and good job. I'm going to go home and I'm just going to crash. Mm-hmm. And I would chuckle and go like, well, you know, that I'm about at halftime right now, because now I'm going to go to my office and I'm going to work my other job, which is my passion,
right,
to build this company that we called The Third Floor after our time on the third floor of the Skywalker Ranch house. But it wasn't on the third floor. It was on the 10th floor of a nearby Art Deco office building.
Right.
So we got through it, and through the perseverance of my fellow 5 other co-founders of the company, all from Skywalker Ranch. We got through like what I call escape velocity. So we ended up having enough work to hire a couple of employees and an HR person at one point, and we're just thrilled because we really didn't have a strong business plan. We were just like, hey, we like doing this. We're going to share our passion with the world. And fortunately, it's worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing that I've always thought was fascinating about Previz is that it is really, in my mind, the closest thing to filmmaking that's in CG in a lot of ways. Because a lot of the stuff that's done in post, it's definitely filmmaking, but you're not as closely connected to constructing or figuring out how to do a shot and working with the directors and working with the editors and working with the actual production process. What are your thoughts about that? And is that sort of the thing that sort of attracted you to that, to Previz?
Well, for me, it was observing what was happening in animated feature development that I saw how pivotal the 3D workbook, or later on the layout reel, was. And even before that, the storyboarding reel, right? That is the guide wire that everyone was using in their various departments with their amazing skills to then, add clay to the sculpture and do it in this collaborative art form that we're all doing together. I mean, it's really a madness when you think about it, like trying to follow the auteur's vision, but also, being open to happy accidents and also not upstaging the director's vision, but bringing your A game as a department chair, if you will, to bring the best production design, bring the best cinematography. And so there's a lot of communication that goes on naturally, whether it's a live action film or an animated feature or a hybrid visual effects driven movie. So I saw, a huge gap of need, if you will, for a blueprinting process, a place where we can treat the film like a sandbox, where we can have a representation, however rough, of what everyone wants. Sure. It's a little bit of the production design. It's definitely the lenses that the DP might want to use. It's all of the early effects experiments and how that tech viz that comes out of the exploratory process, how might that inform the rest of the visual effects development early enough so that you actually have all of the people downstream will have a lot more time to pivot and to build the best and most impressive seamless effect, lessening the surprises and also lessening surprises for the studio themselves. But it is a constant balance, right? You don't want to get locked into your viz. You want to use it as a constantly evolving sculpture or, representation, so that every day you should be able to come in and it's like, how's my film going?
Right.
Well, let's watch it. Let's go hone in on that problem area. And so we become kind of soothsayers of the entire communication between all the departments. And as you might imagine and know out there, every production is different, every film is different, so many different personalities. So it is a bit of a customization of the visualization process, wrapping around like what already exists there, and then also onboarding new players when they come into the show, like, hey, there's this reel, you can watch it, and you can kind of orient yourself. This is generally how the director is envisioning coming into this scene, and then you're going to do your part of it, so this is how it would fit in here. But we're not nearly as good as you guys because you're going to do the final version of it, so please, just use this as reference at the very least. But these days, actually, a lot of the viz is becoming, upgraded to the point where it actually has a life in the final image at some point. And not in every shot, but it's definitely becoming more the norm, especially in virtual production, where we end up informing all of the preloads and the placement of objects. So it's funny. It's like my life's coming full circle. It's all coming back to feeling more like an animated movie.
Right. Yeah, I definitely want to get into virtual production because I know that you guys have been, a natural transition into that area over the last several years. But I am curious about talking about a previs artist and what makes a great previs artist, because I think that they are way more generalists than they are specialists in a lot of ways. What are your thoughts? Like, what if you're going to look at a great previs artist, what does that person need to be?
Generalist used to be kind of a bad word back when there was so much rigor in the visual effects process that you really didn't need an assembly line. You needed like absolute perfection and expertise at modeling, and those people would only model. And then there were the texturing guys,
Right.
and so on and so forth. But over the years, we've championed the use and the value of generalists, like true generalists that can do a little bit of everything, which is an imperative to most of the previs or the visualization process, because it is about being spontaneous and not being kind of held up by any other person or process on your team. You need to be able to MacGyver a solution together and do it in the construct of reality so that it's the right scale. It's not a BS representation of what it is that you intend to propose or represent, but it is very real time, if you will, or as close to real time as possible. And so that's what we say at the core is, like, if you are adept at using your tool of choice, which is usually Maya and increasingly so the Unreal Engine, so we'll talk about that in a bit. But if you know your tools really well, inside and out, and you embody a real passion for filmmaking itself, you touched on it earlier. I mean, we can be awesome technicians, but unless we're representing filmic choices or making suggestions for how things could be improved compositionally, staging-wise, recognizing potential problems in an edit. I mean, we're not always editing the film. We're definitely not editing the final version of the film. But to be able to provide editorial and the director with various angles and cuts and things that actually have some chance of cutting together pleasingly is important. Or else, really, you're not pulling your weight as a professional visualization provider. So that's what we love about it, is it is really spontaneous. And when we get into a good rhythm with the previs supervisor or creative director that is on our side, being the front person for live collaboration with the director or DP, or sometimes visual effects supervisor, second unit directors, even the production designer, everyone who is accessing directly and manipulating the previs, creates a rapport with a couple of people on our production, but primarily it's that previs supervisor. Just like you'd have a visual effects supervisor, we have a previs supervisor, and the trick is to have that previs supervisor prepared enough for the unknown, but with a good knowledge of what that director or designer's style is and what they typically like to ask for. So for some filmmakers, they just like to see the cut, and they want to see it they want to watch the movie that they have prescribed, and they're very, very specific. And so we work really hard to create multiple iterations of that and then cut it together, or work with the professional film editors to make that happen. And then we sit in and we take notes, and we do another version the next day or the next couple of hours. Other directors are much more exploratory, and they're like, well, this is the general inspiration. Here's some really visceral moments that I want to get out of the script that I'm going to describe to you. But all the shoe leather of how all this fits together, they're not going to waste their time, explaining that shot by shot, or even sometimes giving us boards or anything like that. So it's incumbent upon the previs supervisor and their generalistic skills, grounded in film language and a real passion for directing, basically, that they are able to channel the director's intent and then provide something that's worth consideration to potentially take even pieces of that and put that into the order for the final film, if you will.
Sure.
So yeah, but I would say that just to finish answering your question, there are now quite a few sub-disciplines of visualization. That's why we dropped the pre from the big moniker that the big umbrella over our company. And we just now, instead of pre-visualization, it's just visualization, because visualization process doesn't just end with pre, right? There are post-viz artists, there are tech-viz gurus, there are motion control crazy people, and there's so many other folks. Even within just the regular old pre-viz service, we have asset builders, which are world builders, more than modelers, modeling, texturing, effects elements, bringing the world to life, making it feel like a persistent environment. So it could be like the world of Pandora, it could be a Game of Thrones set, and the characters that need to be rigged. And then we pass that on to what we call a shot creator, because we couldn't come up with a better term. That we were like, oh, animator, yeah, but they're not just animating. They're staging, they're doing some representation of the potential cinematography, all of that. So yes, asset builders, shot creators, Previz supervisor, and then of course our line producers and coordinators on the production staff that really make the world go round for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an interesting discipline, and it is really such an integral part to filmmaking these days. It was kind of unheard of to do. You're going to do the whole thing in CG before you shoot the movie, and it was just kind of this strange idea. And it's like, why don't you just use storyboards or something like that, right? And so I think it's really interesting that it's allowed filmmakers to just really kind of explore things, and in a sense, save them a ton of money when they're actually shooting, right?
Well, it's not, I always say it's not about saving money. It's about maximizing whatever budget you have and getting more of that on the screen to your liking than on the cutting room floor.
Right.
Because filmmaking is inherently a destructive process. You got to try, you got to throw out lost leader. You may even commission a fancy visual effects final that you realize in the end, well, it's beautiful. Thank you very much. It just doesn't fit the mood at this moment, or we're showing off too much. It's more of a sentimental moment. We got to cut to the close-up.
Right.
It's all in service of making the best film, which is the right approach. But if you can identify some of those potential pitfalls or, magical advantages before these magical moments, then you can have enough time for the whole rest of the process to build to that vision. Sure. I mean, that's what you do when you build a building, right? You have the great architect will come in and consult with the clients, know what human behavior is like, aka the audience. They prescribe the vision in a concept painting, maybe, and then they have to go in and start designing every facet of this. And at some point, someone knows how many screws and how many bolts and how much lumber they need and how many windows they need to order and when. And filmmaking is like that, but it's not just one building, it's 1,000 buildings and locations and so many other factors that have to come together. It's actually a miracle that any movie, even the worst movie on earth, I'm like applauding them, like, wow, you got it done. Like it's incredible. And to on top of that make something that is emotionally impactful, and like fans out there just like turn into their absorbed into their culture, into their personality is incredible. We love being a part of that. And we love celebrating with our clients to see like some of the influence that we might have had along the road or the assistance that we provided. We love seeing that like just blossom on the screen. And we usually, we stay really humble. We really genuinely feel that way. Like, we're just blessed to be a part of the community that has contributed to this. And so when the Academy Awards are announced, we're not saying like, why am I not up there? It's like we're all just celebrating the film itself and all the great human relationships we've had along the way. And that's what's really fulfilling for me, because it's like at the ranch, I met all these random people that I didn't know if they were going to be good or bad or nice or mean. they turned out to be awesome and eclectic with their different skills. And when we gelled, and I kept that family together. And now with Third Floor, the company, I've been able to invite all these amazing rock stars from around the world that are just such lovely human beings that have contributed to our culture. And it's like a snowball that's going like, yeah, I can't stop it anymore. When we're busiest, so far we've had like 500 employees working globally around the world out of 4 offices. So it's a pretty decent sized operation now, but I'm proud to say it's grown very organically, and we've stayed very true to our principles. Artist driven environment, treating our employees as we would like our clients to treat us, and vice versa, like really creating a benevolent community, because ultimately we're selling our creativity. You got to have happy people. They got to go home and have a work-life balance in order to be their best creatively, or be the best innovators technically.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I've just always been really impressed with Third Floor. I remember Previz companies were kind of popping up here and there, and there were smaller places, 20-person shops or less, and it became a big thing. And I think I remember a couple of years ago, many years ago, there was an organization that was trying to create a Previz community. Is that true?
Previz Society.
The Previz Society.
I'm very proud to have been part of that.
Yeah.
Me and the other heads of other prominent Previz companies around that time.
Yep.
We all basically started around the same time. There's a few that started even before us, technically, and we were fast friends. We put any kind of competitive differences aside and said, hey, there's more to be gained by the community that we can build. And really it's about education, right? Because this never used to be a department. It was never understood between, in the traditional canon of filmmaking. So we put on even like a conference or two, and we had meetups locally here in LA. We had really good attendance, and we did it for many years, to the point where we were just like, wow, we've really educated a lot of people, and now it seems to be spinning off out of control, and without our influence. So we decided to kind of wrap up the society itself, and it was a lot of the intent behind that was absorbed into David Morin and some of the work that he did with the Virtual Production Society, and onward into Jean-Michel Realtime Society, and all of that. So
that's really great. I would definitely want to get into the Real-Time Society, because we're both members of that, and we've been, but the growth of the Third Floor has been absolutely spectacular to me. Just seeing those, it's just such an important part of Hollywood, really, and also just filmmaking at large. But you must have seen some huge changes in how people approach films, in terms of what they're doing, how they think of technology, and how they start to the different stages at which they take advantage of the things that you guys are doing. How would you say it has changed over the last 20 years or so?
Well, it kind of goes in phases, right? The early days was just about trying to find any customer that would believe that try before you buy is a good plan. Right. It seemed to make logical sense to us. So we were like, it's inevitable, right? Everyone's going to want to do this eventually. They just don't know. Then, around the time that Marvel Studios was set up and they were doing Iron Man 1 and beyond, we got involved in Iron Man 2, and then just sort of took off with them, thanks to their benevolence and really Victoria Alonso taking chance on me and us. Thank you, Victoria. It was a revolution for us, because we ended up being able to expand, and we were able to do so organically to the point where we could preserve the level of quality, film over film. Obviously, we were doing lots of other projects too, outside of the Disney universe, or at the time, Marvel on its own. But then I think, in the last I would say 8 to 9 years, there's been an increasingly creeping in of real-time tools and workflows. So I'd mentioned virtual production before, but that's like one of the new fancy buzzwords around town, because Mandalorian and other examples showed that, hey, an LED wall and a volume of in-camera visual effects can actually be a very, very exciting way to shoot an otherworldly film or a particularly challenging location in a repeatable way. And we were hearing all these people pontificate about how they're all, into virtual production and stuff. And I'm like, that's great. Well, we've been into virtual production for 18 years, like in one form or another.
Sure.
But I mean, granted, I'm surprised you didn't know about that, because that was with, Robert Zemeckis and Cameron, a bunch of other amazing pioneers that were really trying to do various aspects of virtual production, which we see not as just the LED wall, which is an important component of some types of virtual production. But the virtual production, for me, the big V, is really all forms of real-time pre-production, production, and post-production, right? It's literally the integration of computer graphics live on set or in the preparatory process to make ready for the set. So the dress rehearsal, if you will.
Sure.
And recently, maybe we can put it in the chat or your page, we created this link to a video that we did all in the Unreal Engine. This was debuted first at the Directors Guild of America this past year.
Yep.
And it was an overview done by Casey Schatz, the amazing dynamic, our head of virtual production, who's been working with Cameron on Avatar, The Way of Water, and many other films before that. He embodied his knowledge of what's happening in virtual production on set from soup to nuts, from the moment an idea is launched all the way through that final image on screen and in the movie theater. So it's a nice little walkthrough. And if you watch that video, you guys will see that about 90% of the time that we take through this somewhat linear process to the end result is not being on set. There's so much work that goes into feeding a virtual production, a proper LED-based in-camera visual effects pipeline, and then there's a lot of work afterwards. So, we're evangelists for the pre-production part of it, and we've built fancy tools that are very easy to use, that are a combination of virtual cameras, and augmented reality overlays using HoloLens 2. But our most popular one is an AR device on an iPad we call Cyclops, because Cyclops used to be, because iPads used to have only one camera on the backside, so we were like, oh, it's a single-eyed thing, like a Cyclops, or reminds us of Ray Harryhausen, who we loved.
Yeah.
Anyways, so that app has been award-winning and actually used by so many VFX soups and various personnel to essentially allow you to see what your virtual environment and characters will look like, whether static or in motion, and try out different camera moves. It's basically like professional Pokemon Go. and really easy to lay out and to try out different things. Like, for example, recently we were working on Clifford the Big Red Dog, a film that included the big red dog at various scales. And the filmmakers had a ball going out and auditioning locations, malls, parking lots, parks, and things. And so we pre-animated little Clifford, who became Big Clifford, rolling over, running, walking, standing, different statures, and all these things. They could conjure that up and see him literally hover in front of the camera and send all that feedback back to us, those recordings. It's so helpful to put that together. So anyways, that is what's really exciting to me about the virtual production revolution, is it is putting the power back in the hands of the filmmakers. So we still are involved. We're doing a lot of prep work. We're making sure it all works for the moment, the glorious moment of exploration. But it really should be the director themselves, the DPs, all of the traditional department heads, like using tools like this to explore the possibilities and having a real conversation, like, well, over there or bigger, how about the color? All of these different things that you could consider changing on the fly, at least in rough, and making that be the footage for editorial. So there's a lot of thought going into what is the future of visualization and how does that become more of a performance, if you will.
Right.
Even if it is used for pre-production only and doesn't even have anything to do with visual effects, it's still, you could use highly enhanced virtual production, real-time workflows to make a live action film with, a very, very simple plot that would be well thought out and artfully blocked such that you have the most meaningful cinematic experience in the final film.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've been thinking about that for a long time. I used to, back in the 2013, 2012 era, I saw that somehow as a little bit of a dark period in CG, because the Hollywood was very anti-CG. I call it the Life of Pi days, right? They were not, there's a lot of dystopian feel. But at the same time, I was thinking about the filmmakers who sit in a big blue room and with a couple of actors, and then just had to imagine what was going to be there, hand it over to the visual effects company and hope for the best. And it really must have been very hard for them to be thinking of themselves as filmmakers at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that what you just said is exactly right. Do you think that directors now are excited to be part of the CG process from the beginning because of the real time is enabling that to happen?
Well, I don't speak for all directors, and all directors are different. So,
right.
But we're seeing a trend towards getting more traditional filmmakers excited about the creative process that computer graphics enables, because of basically real-time workflows, game engines, driving that at the core. But it's really the interfaces around the graphics engine that allows it to feel a lot like a simulation of what they do normally in their lives. So, for example, like a DP, many DPs used to just ignore the Previz because they explained to me once, actually, at the ASC Clubhouse. I was there presenting passionately, like, here's our pre-visualization. And I think it was Vilmos Zsigmond was there, and he was saying, Chris, thanks for all this, but I don't get it. When I go out on set, I just have to be there to see the lighting and to see what's not there and to strike the lights and to feel the mood and all of these things. And I go, I'm so sorry. What we're doing is we're doing the camera mechanics part of blocking and testing out angles. You're right. We're totally overlooking the magic of cinema, which is mostly to do with light, and combined with the camera angle and the lens characteristics and all of that stuff. But it's the light that photographs the image,
Sure.
That it makes it indelible. So it's because of the graphics engines and the upgrades that we have now to be able to simulate lighting in a more pleasing and realistic way that now all the DPs are starting to come back and like, I'll consider getting involved in that, because I'll learn a lot, because the light response is similar to what I might expect when I'm out on set. And in fact, now I'm being tasked to have practical lights match the virtual lights, and let's not leave it all to compositing to fix our mistakes.
Yeah.
Or things, not even mistakes, but things that they couldn't have predicted until they see that final image. So being able to see it in real time makes it so much more spontaneous, which really is synonymous with the magic of filmmaking, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I'll have to tell you more about what I've been doing with Vantage, which is our real-time ray tracer, and how we're integrating it with Unreal to get real-time ray tracing.
Hook us up, Chaos Labs.
Yeah, yeah,
thank
for sure.
you. I wanted to mention real quick because it reminded me of, I had mentioned Casey, but Casey Schatz has been a genius creator of a system that was used heavily to give actors reference on set for Avatar to the Way of Water.
Okay.
And it's called affectionately the Eyeline system, I believe.
Yes.
This is something where basically his idea was, let's get an iPad-ish device. It is more of a monitor, smaller, and let's actually track the position of the original performer's face and movement in the 3D space. And let's now develop this eyeline system where a spider cam can be moving around accurately in 3D in actual physical space, that monitor showing that performance. So literally if someone's coming up and, you know, racing up to the face of another actor and saying like, you're going to do it no matter what, you know, and scaring that person, it literally would move towards that second actor. So on Avatar, my understanding from what James Cameron said during the Director's Day was that it was very pivotal to be able to shoot performances across times, meaning that they may not have all the performers in the same place at the same time, partially because of the pandemic and partially because of age restrictions and things, you know, different ages they wanted the actors to be at different times. And because of the scale changes, obviously, of the Na'vi and all that, they needed to compensate for all of that and provide the accurate reference, which would have been the silly tennis ball or the guy trying to perform generally what it was for the eye lines. Now you have a very, you know, computer-aided way of doing that. And it was revolutionary, I believe, for the actors and their performances to be all the more natural.
I did see, I went to HPA a couple weeks ago, to the HPA Tech Retreat, and I saw that demo, and I was like, that's impressive, because there is so much. First of all, I just got to say that that movie is one of the most impressive cinematic experiences I've seen in a long time. It just blew me away.
I agree.
And the fact that they got those performances to be so good with each other was incredibly impressive, because knowing that probably some of the action that was happening was probably years apart.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's just like with Previz, you know, it's a testament to the actors and their versatility. Ultimately, you know, they laid down those performances, but hopefully the work that Casey did and on some of the other pre-production and in fact the entire team supporting the filmmaker and Lightstorm and the studio really is what made this come together so impressively. Right. And so crossing my fingers for Academy Awards night coming up for the visual effects.
It's going to be very, very, very exciting. I don't see why they wouldn't win, but I'm very, I think they're going to do really, really well. So I'm very excited. I could talk to you about virtual production forever, but I still only have 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we can cover something that I think is going to be interesting, because I'd love to hear your take on it. I've been asking a lot of people about where they think that a lot of the new tools that are just coming out like on an hourly basis, AI tools are coming out on an hourly basis. How do you feel about those tools? And especially since they seem so good at conceptualizing things so quickly, how do you think that's going to affect what you guys are doing or the way that you guys operate?
Well, you know, I also was caught a little by surprise, like everyone, at how fast the development has been. But I've seen, you know, the Terminator movies a lot, so it didn't actually, in retrospect, it didn't surprise me that, you know, Cyberdyne Systems is increasing in potency that fast in an exponential way. But, you know, actually, I find it not very intimidating, but actually a plus, because for us, you know, we're really following in the tradition of basically the model miniature makers that used to, if you remember in that book that I mentioned, the little black, or the pretty large black book of ILM, Art of Special Effects, they detail how they would go out and get a bunch of kits from the local model shop, where it's like trains, planes, and automobiles and they would just use it for raw materials. It was kit bashing, right? And so if you look at the Millennium Falcon and all of the Death Star and stuff, there's little bits and pieces of other models and a lot of custom stuff too. But to get all the nernies in there, that is sourced from those kits. So I'm thinking that the AI 3D model generation capabilities can be just a resource for true designers to say, oh, give me a little bit of this, give me a little bit of that. Okay, computer, it like in a holodeck, it brings stuff up that's worth considering. You go, okay, let me take pieces of this and pieces of that and combine it. The final conjunction of all those things really should come together for the next foreseeable future under the watchful eye and guidance of a true human artist who is aware of all the other variables on the project, the style of the director, what they actually asked them to do, what the scene needs, the human experience interpretation that has to go into applying a certain design choice to a film. So for us, it doesn't really make too much of a difference, but we see it as a boom to productivity. Because we're not finaling the image, if you will, then we're affected maybe less than others. Perhaps AI itself will be good at polishing abnormalities and things that might have been taking place in compositing. So maybe that's one of the fields that's going to be renovated in a more substantial way. But for me, it's about this entire revolution of just computer graphics, Moore's law going, exponentially more powerful, exponentially more detailed, and having zero limitations for the filmmakers in terms of the complexity of geometry in a scene. But above and beyond all of that stuff that's going to come from the Epic Gameses and the NVIDIAs of the world and the major software developers, it really is incumbent upon the generalist artists of the world to come up with what's the workflow that works, given all of these ever-changing advantages of faster this and faster that and AI generated this. Like, how does that affect the workflow? And that's why we created that video that I referred to say, this is the workflow we see working now. We're going to use it as a document to constantly upgrade it and say, oh, actually now that step doesn't make any sense anymore. We've combined it with this one. So like in Previz itself, one needs to be nimble and responsive to whatever's happening in the world.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I don't know how it's going to affect different areas. I just know that almost everything in computer graphics and filmmaking will be affected by these innovations.
Yeah. I think the user-generated content will be the one thing that this will be used a lot in. So, all the YouTubers, the influencers and stuff will be able to use AI-generated stuff as like sort of the elevated clip art, if you will.
Sure.
And so, maybe folks that are not computer savvy in the traditional visual effects sense will be able to command a pretty powerful-looking result by using these tools, but it will still appear somewhat generic for the time being. And so I'm not too worried about the professionals in our current industry that are, typically working on very bespoke and very, the top tier projects that need to be designed in a custom way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But it is also exciting too, because we talk a little bit about the metaverse and I know, that's the next big buzzword everyone's talking about. And I really am excited about this opportunity too, because you really think about, well, what is the future of the internet itself? And those various locales on the internet are going to get increasingly less 2D and more three-dimensional, which then makes it feel like a 3D playset like we would do in Previz. If all of our assets are real-time anyways, maybe we could pivot to be a designer for these types of experiences, stories and worlds that take place in the metaverse. I mean, we did pitch Viz and early development on Ready Player One, so I still feel like an obligation to contribute to that future.
Yeah.
Maybe we set expectations a little too high at first with Steven and the original source material, but yeah, I mean, we're excited about that. And what are the possibilities for cross-platform storytelling between traditional films, the episodic spin-off series, the experiential entertainment, location-based experience that is the companion one, like Stranger Things experience, for example, and then the metaverse component of that, where you can go regardless of boundaries, regardless of how much money you make or what your means are, as long as you have a computer or a device, you too can experience all of these things. So that to me is very exciting. It's a great equalizer for consumers out there to experience the future of storytelling.
Yeah, well, that's a really good way to put it. I do want to talk real quickly about Realtime Society. You are a member of that. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on at the Realtime Society with you?
Yeah, so Realtime Society and the Realtime Conference is the brainchild of Jean-Michel Blottier, who some of you old school folks know he was the curator of FMX, the famous Stuttgart, Germany art and technology convention that really is in kind of an elevated European SIGGRAPH, if you will.
Right.
A very cool kids, atmosphere. A lot of studio executives would go there and present visions that are even more, forthcoming than what they might show in Hollywood. So maybe it was because of the German beer and stuff and good food and wining and dining. But at the end of the day, that is the brilliance of Jean-Michel. And so now he has this new society and the new conference events that are happening around Realtime Society that are really tackling some of the issues we touched on today. So our role in that is to contribute to a think tank that is discussing all of the innovations in virtual production and some of the media and entertainment use cases for Realtime Society. We've done, or for real-time technology. We've done some conferences, we've done some bespoke videos that showcase our tools and workflows on specific projects, and we're looking forward to, and there's like a VIP event happening pretty soon in New York City, which will be the Economic Forum, and this is going to be focusing on, what are the underpinnings that we need to tackle in order to make virtual production easier, more accessible, and more affordable to all. So that the Real-Time Economic Summit, I think, is what it's called.
Yep.
So that's the next step there. We're very happy that there's this vibrant community of real-time evangelists and working professionals. And I think it's probably me talking a little less than my CTO and developers getting more involved in these higher level discussions. But it's been a good journey so far.
Yeah, I've actually been part of it myself. I've been very excited about it, and knowing that you're there too. It's always good to have great voices. I think one of the things that I'm excited about it is the fact that it's not just media and entertainment. There's actually other industries that are tackling similar problems that you may not have heard of before, and they're finally able to bet two people in the same room and then maybe solve one problem instead of two problems.
I mean, the operative word is convergence, right?
Yeah,
it sounds cliche, but we are actually all converging around real-time workflows.
Yep.
And there's a lot we can learn from each other.
For sure.
And I think because of visual effects community being so entrepreneurial and so ambitious and so masochistic in some regard, we have built up such a body of knowledge and tools and code and awesome experience that probably is leaps and bounds beyond what a lot of other comparable sectors in various other industries are doing with this similar hardware and similar software. So I feel like we have an obligation to spread the word and to make it some of the quirky things we do relevant in other sectors too, like architecture and product design, even location-based entertainment. We design a lot of the Universal Studios theme park attractions in concert with their Imagineers, if you will. Mm-hmm. They're a group called Universal Creative, and we've been blessed to design aspects of and the main e-ticket attraction for the Super Nintendo World in Osaka, Japan, and now it's already open in here in Universal Studios Hollywood. So that, other things that you may not know about Third Floor, we design tons of video game cinematics. We even contribute to architectural visualizations sometimes, do a ton of Super Bowl commercials and things like that.
Yep.
And lots of episodic stuff. So pretty much everything from Game of Thrones to Lucasfilm franchises. We're just so blessed to be a part of their family and kind of invited into the inner circle of those high-end virtual productions. Coming up soon, we have a lot of work that went into Mandalorian Season 3. Out in theaters now is Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, so you can see all of the hard transition work that we worked on there. Dungeons and Dragons coming up soon. Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in May, and Transformers Rise of the Beasts for something completely different on June 23rd. So it's just these days we have...
That's an incredible lineup.
As I said, it's a snowball that I can't stop. We have usually 25 to 35 projects going on at any given time around the world. Wow. A single project could be like a little commercial for a couple of weeks, or it could be a giant blockbuster that needs to be pre-visualized 7 times over and take over a year, maybe a year and a half to for the complete visualization support process. So
wow,
it's a wild ride, and hats off to my team and all the just awesome supervisors, leads, creative personnel, production teams, support networks, all the L&D folks, the pipeline team, IT, everyone at Third Floor who just rocks it every day and puts their true passion into it to make any of this possible. It's just, I feel so blessed and fortunate to have them in our company.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great way to end it, Chris. Thank you so much for being part of this. I've been wanting to do a podcast with you for quite some time. I'm gladly finally got it done, and we were able to talk at this very opportune moment. So looking forward to seeing you. I will probably be at the Economic Summit myself, so we'll probably see you in New York.
Awesome.
But
hope to cross paths.
Yeah, but thank you again so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much.